Pat for the introduction, and thank you everybody for coming. It's been a good conference so far, and I'm honored to have an opportunity to come and speak to the community here about what we've been doing here since 2012. The funny thing is that so I was talking with Pat about this conference and what it would be like, and because I had spoken at his IoT Minneapolis, which I highly encourage everybody who's here and interested in IoT to attend. It's a regular thing. It's a microcosm maybe of what's happening here. But there I was asked to speak a little bit about wearable tech and why the wearable form factor, to talk about where wearable fits in the IoT space and why it makes sense to embrace that. Whereas in this case, Pat said, you know, the population here is going to be very, very diverse. It's going to be business people, marketing people, people with engineering background, people with UX design. And I said, well, what do you think I should talk about? He said, dude, just talk about your company, because like you know, you can go all these other places in the world and people know who you are, but you get to Minneapolis and people are like, play the boss, play, what is that? So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you guys today. The company is called Playdabase, as you know, and the focus of our company is to create solutions that people absolutely love, and that means that calls upon us to do things that are quite different from saying, okay, like I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, a connected toaster, great. So I've got a toaster, I want to connect it to the internet. Let me do that. Why, right? Is anybody really going to love a toaster? Has anybody felt a strong, seriously, raise your hand if you've had a strong emotional connection? One strong emotional connection to a little stove for bread, right? It's a very rare thing. But there's a lot of people who are desperately pursuing that. People who've quit college to pursue the connected toaster. I'm not saying that we don't need a connected toaster. I would love to have a connected toaster. But my company, Playdabase, is called to create solutions, that means solve problems, that people love. That means that people have an emotional connection to. Obviously we have the word play in our name, so things that people find engaging, fun, etc. And so, you know, here in the entrepreneurial community here in Minnesota, and around the world, people have this kind of question about, okay, I want to pursue something, but we get a lot of knack as entrepreneurs for pursuing things that don't solve real problems. Playdabase focuses on solving these real problems, and not on the microscopic kind of problems, but things that will actually improve people's lives in a very noticeable way. And so, you know, I found a little video online that I thought perfectly kind of encompassed what I mean by this in terms of, you know, not just thinking in the small, like, all right, I have a connected pen, or a connected goodness, water. No, I won't say that, but a connected toaster. Come on, tech, work for me.
Can you guys hear him without the mic?
That might be a good idea. Here we go.
I don't know what's causing
You mustn't be afraid to dream of bigger, darling.
So yeah, so let's dream a little bigger is the main idea there. You know, we can do more as innovators. So, like I said, our company exists to create solutions that people love, and that means that we're focused on how can we find something that sits at the intersection of things which are marketable, which is necessarily important, things that are feasible, things we can actually do, things that are unique, and most important to us as a company, things that actually matter, things that are meaningful. And so Remo is one such manifestation of our company purpose. Remo is the gesture recognition control platform for the IoT. Outright, we developed it from the ground up with the thought in mind, how do we interact with the Internet of Things and the connected devices that are all around us via gesture, and why gesture, and how we can do that the best in the world. So while I was doing my PhD here at the university in 2012, my father, who's pictured there, had a series of strokes, as Pat said, and lost control of his entire environment. This is a very debilitating situation. This is a very removing experience. Does anybody have any experience with somebody losing like a stroke or a heart attack? Yeah? Yeah. So you guys know what I'm talking about. It's gut-wrenching stuff. Now my father was a real kind of, he's a sales guy. He would bust into the room. He'd come in here, he'd know everybody's name in less than 20 minutes. And I mean, he'd be able to remember. He'd shake everybody's hand. Real retail politician kind of guy. The second he lost that control of his home, he couldn't bring natural light in. Everybody's got a dad who kind of sits down in that super chair in front of the TV and he controls everything. But the second he lost that, he couldn't do anything. Right? Couldn't control his home, couldn't control his life. And so I looked at how can we actually interact with the world, how can we make these Internet of Things devices easier to control. The smart home was not being very well adopted. It's on a growth curve now. And at the time, just for, everybody knows this word Internet of Things today. 2 years ago, that was barely a term, right? I mean, some of the folks in this room I recognize, we were talking about M2M, SmartThings was getting started, Nest was only a year old. So it was a different scenario. Remo exists at this intersection between the wrist and the home and gesture, in terms of how we actually go about things. Now, like in 2012, the smart home's the Jetsons, right? Yeah, it's I push the button, things happen, and that's the experience that we're trying to recreate with the smartphone. And it's a nice experience. I'd love to have food in a pill at some point. Although I'd like it to taste great and be texturous and all of that good stuff. This is the progression that we've made here in the community. We actually started a building or two down from here in the bowels of the civil engineering building, which has barely any Wi-Fi. And these are the moves we made. In 2014, this is actually where we were, breaking off an Arduino board and ordering our first ordering a Spark core. We've moved along the path in our development, accelerated heavily by our interaction with Microsoft. In April, we'll be releasing our alphas for folks who sign up for our developer program. And soon we'll be having our consumer version towards the fall, so in time for Christmas. So the solution that we've built will have a developer API, curated gestures, customizable gestures, adjustable sensitivity, and cross-platform. Let's see. I'm thinking that maybe you guys don't have a perfect understanding of what I mean by Remo. So why don't I show you a little something so that you can have a picture of it. So let's see. How can I? It's not going down.
Use your mic.
What's that?
Put your mic by it.
There we go. What's that? You said my mic. Okay. So the thing is that we talk about this Internet of Things thing, and typically it's tech that exists for. I mean, I don't want to say it's tech that exists for tech's sake, but there's a lot of techies who are making this cool tech, and how do we actually integrate it into people's lives? So what we're doing with Remo is giving people the opportunity to actually interact with a range of these connected devices that are in their lives all over the place. Their Nest thermostat, their Logitech Harmony TV remote, their entire setup. Remo exists in this spectrum to be able to give you the control of the devices that are in your life every day, and to do it in an effortless way, effortless control of the things that are around you. So if you take yourself away from that moment and you say, okay, I've got this one connected device, I've got this one connected speaker, and you assume that your whole house is connected, everything is connected, how do you control all of that? Right? So this is our picture of how you control all of that. You actually just point at the thing you want to control, you gesture to control it, or you do a whole gesture to control the whole scene. Right? This is markedly different from taking out your phone, finding the app, digging through it, and all of that. This is an effortless scenario that incorporates different aspects of your life and goes with you wherever you want it to go. You certainly, in a gym scenario, don't want internet-connected cameras watching you in the locker room so that you can have gesture control. Remo goes with you on your smartwatch, right? So it's very portable in that way. It gives you that opportunity to interact with all of these devices, regardless of whether or not you want to have internet-connected cameras in your bedroom, in your shower, etc. I don't want those things. I don't know. If you do, I'm not going to judge you. I mean, there's a market for that too, right? Okay, so let's see. So that's what we're doing in terms of our API. Our team includes some really bright people, really bright people. We've had successful exits. We've got engineers who've been focused on gesture recognition and gesture control for several years. And just a brilliant team. Our CTO actually won an international award for the design of lighting home control systems. In terms of platform partners, what it means to develop with Remo, it means that you have access to roughly 90% of the smart home market. Right? So a developer working with the Remo system has access through Remo to connect with the smart home technology that's delivered to people's homes across the country via Comcast, Cox, ADT, AT&T Digital Life, through Logitech, through everybody's television, etc. And of course, local home favorite smart things. Okay. Yeah. Why is it so quickly down? It's a good question. Why hasn't the smart home been adopted? At Platabase, we believe the reason that smart home technology and the IoT in general hasn't reached the kind of critical adoption mass that we've been looking for over a decade has to do with the interface. That in the case of a lot of these products, the interface is the product. And so, the system isn't very smart, and because I can still use a light switch because I don't have all these smart devices, I might go and do that. Or I might say, well, I'm okay with my disparate systems. IoT hasn't lived up to the promise that we believe it has, and that we as a community believe it has, and that we've marketed to people. And everybody has some kind of slide like this. Oh my God, there's a huge market. It's going to be big. It's going to be so huge. Believe me, this internet thing's going to be big. Or excuse me, this Internet of Things thing is going to be big, right? But this interface actually sucks, right? I mean, it's really great for what it does, but it's not great for interacting with the world. How many of you guys have surfed the internet without a mouse? Like you didn't have your mouse for some reason, you had to just do it. Just had to use a keyboard. Raise your hands, raise them proud, it's okay. All right. What's that experience like? What's that experience like? Anybody?
Sucks.
Lots of tabbing. It's freaking ridiculous. Like, can you imagine if you use the analogy of the keyboard for this thing, all right? And all of the devices around here, the lights, the projectors, the clock, the projector, were all links around the world, Because that's what we're creating when we create all these connected devices. We're creating physical links in the physical world, right? I don't want to tab through all of that. That's ridiculous. Furthermore, if I have 100 different devices I have to scroll through, even in one unification app, that is a brutal process. Fortunately, and I spoke about this at the Wearable Technologies Conference in Munich. Fortunately, when we were dealing with trying to make computers personal, we had a particular innovation that had been invented 20 years before, the computer mouse, right? And that gives us the ability to just point and click on the things we want. And Remo gives us the ability to point and gesture at the links that we're creating around the world. Does that make sense? So that's why this sucks. It doesn't suck by itself. It's really brilliant the way it is for what it does. In the same way the keyboard is brilliant. But as the Internet of Things continues to scale and the devices that we're controlling become more complex, we're going to need something like Remo. So what that means is that effectively we've kind of been working for almost 3 years on a light switch before electricity was ubiquitous, which most people actually told me I was crazy for doing for a while, or really, this is sort of not. Can you hear me? Yeah, that's better. Told me I was actually crazy for working on, but that's not so bad. In the future, we believe that the interface and the way that people deal with this technology will be a combination of a number of factors, including voice, context, of course, and gesture. And that these things will all be integrated together in the same way that interacting with our computers or our phones might incorporate some kind of voice, some kind of smart system, etc. But we find ourselves creating this effectively a mouse for interaction with these systems today. And as Pat said, my PhD is actually in linguistics, so this interaction between gesture and voice is something that I'm exceptionally passionate about, as well as gesture interaction. Today we are deep into the connected home space, and we've already signed on some corporate developers. If you sign up for our program at getremo.com, you can also get a do-it-yourself gesture control kit. Coming up, we'll be going back to our roots into healthcare. As I mentioned before, the impetus for this was that if your IoT devices were not easy enough to use by a one-armed stroke victim, then they weren't usable or sufficiently usable, as well as automotive and eventually into the industrial spaces. We see a lot of opportunity for remote technology in a number of fields, and I can address some of that in the Q&A if you're interested. And so ultimately, as this IoT space grows, this is where Remo actually fits. So that's your introduction to Platabase and Remo. That kind of gives some space on exactly what it is we're doing, and just in the spirit of thinking bigger and fun. I'll show you guys a little preview of something that we're about to put out, but you guys are going to be one of the first to see it. The folks at IoT Minneapolis. No, what's happening? Stop. No! Okay. And we're good.
Hi, I'm Alex. And I'm Brian. And I'm Confident Monologue Guy. Here to take over your generic and unsatisfying commercial. Do you like these? Do you like these? Of course you don't. You yearn for something greater. You want control. I have control. I can give you control with this. With a flick of my wrist, I can rock this baby. I can rock this baby's world. I can rock yours. And doing so, I rock my own world. Rocking my world is child's play with Remo. It's so easy, even a child can use it. And so can Grandpa. Nice job, Gramps. I was cooking. Woo-hoo! Remo, baby! With Remo, I can open this door and unleash a sea of hat-wearing kittens. Adorable. Now, Nero, I know what you're thinking because I always know what you're thinking. Is this sorcery
Thank you very much. You know, it took forever to get that little cat to like take the hat off right on cue. Like, it's really corralling 13
Were any
kittens.
cats hurt in that video?
What's that?
Were any cats hurt in that video?
No, actually, no cats were hurt. So we actually made the video about 1.5 years ago. So the video is old. We haven't released it yet. No, so we got him from a shelter, and the folks who managed the shelter were there the whole time, making sure the kittens were good. And the kids who were there were also playing the dancers and everything. A lot of the dancers actually, almost everybody in the video was from the company, or like works for the company. Of course, I'm not in it because, you know, Morpheus. So, so I'd love to open it up to questions. I think that's probably one of the best ways we can get some stuff through. You had a question first, sir.
You're thinking around having gestures. I know it came from your father and needing a way to communicate with his world, but tell me some of your thinking around using a gesture to do that. Yes.
So a lot of attention was actually paid not just to why gesture, but also to which gestures. So maybe I'm not. Let me. Could you go a little bit deeper?
As opposed to some other method, cocking of the head, arm movement,
sure.
You know, because
So-
it's on the wrist.
Yeah. So we didn't go to the wrist. So we didn't choose a wearable form factor because wearable was cool. In fact, wearable wasn't cool at the time. The term glass hole didn't even exist yet. You know, right? So the reason we did it was because he lost control of one arm, he had control of the other. There's a number of factors in this. I've even heard that if you are losing one arm but you keep the other one going, that it tells the rest of the body don't completely lose that. But the main factor was we needed something that would be universal, that would work across different conditions and across different parts of the world. So the application itself is a very natural way to interface with anything, because as I called on you, I said something and pointed in your direction. I mean, it doesn't get much simpler than that. You don't have to teach a 2-year-old to do that. They do it automatically. So I'd have to teach somebody to, you know, kind of like move their heads up at something, or kind of twink their eyes. But you don't really have to teach somebody. You see it once and you know what to do. In terms of the gesture set itself, I put a lot of work into that on the design side before we ever wrote any code. So I'm sorry, I'm like moving out of the view space, aren't I? So from India to Indiana, increase intensity, decrease intensity, selection. You know, it's very straightforward for most folks. So yes.
Well, I'm curious about, because of your background in linguistics, how global across cultures and language are gestures?
So I actually looked, and as I said, you know, I've got a whole team with us, so it's not just me, right? But from the very beginning, you can look at primate communication, and you can see similarities. So I mean, I won't specifically say that baboons communicate the same way. They don't, right? But this indication that something's going up or something's going down, something's bigger or something's smaller. You don't have to teach people that concept. The Bushmen of the Kalahari will hold like a stick above their heads to show that they're taller than the hyenas, so it won't come after them. You know, it's a digression, but the concept of bigger because bigger, like it's just right up there in front of you. I haven't encountered anyone who said, no, that's not true. I have encountered people who said they didn't get it, and then I said, okay, how would you do this? And they say, oh well, okay. they kind of lose it at that point. So, yes.
Oh, were you finished? I don't want to.
Did I answer your question?
Well, yeah, because it's you basically talk about the universality of gesture
Yes.
versus voice, which of course has to be translated across all languages, and
Don't get me started.
there's enunciation issues and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, voice. I mean, I can go into detail, and I've actually written a few, so I'll be blogging soon, and I've got a series on exactly where voice succeeds and fails, the design of speech interfaces for the smart home, how it works with AI. There's a lot of things to try to accomplish, and I think that the shortest way for me to address the speech recognition aspect is at the CES this year, we did collaborative demos with Logitech. And during that time period, they wanted to use their speech recognition for that moment, or at a moment, and it was too loud. Anybody who's been to CES knows, I mean, it's a madhouse there. Gesture worked fine. Voice, you got to get through. So there's a lot of factors. Accent, changes in your voice after some kind of condition, for example, stroke. Both of my grandfathers lost their speech for a short period of time after they had their strokes. My father didn't, but I already knew that was an issue. So you had a question?
Yeah, so you mentioned that in the not too distant future you see gesturing playing a role in the industrial markets. So can you give me some idea of the applications that you've been pursuing or thinking about?
Yes, absolutely. If you consider the fact that remote control in general is useful anytime you want to be in more than one place at one time, right? And the ability to get that thing, and that thing, and either derive control capability, information, etc., in that instant can be quite powerful. So whether you're in a warehouse and you want to understand what's on that top shelf that you can't see, or how much something weighs, or what have you, interaction with connected devices is our focus, more so than the connected device itself. So the spectrum of the things that you can apply it to in those different sectors applies to effectively the same things you do with the remote control, but in a much more intuitive and very quick way, as opposed to, okay, I need this thing now, so I'm going to bring up the app for this and scroll through. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, you've been looking for a second.
How does gesturing at something that's next to each other, how do you control one versus the other? So if there's your radio and your lights, how do you point at one thing and not control both of them at the same time? Or how can you do one or the other?
Yeah, that's actually a fantastic question, and a real cornerstone of remote technology. So Remo incorporates 9-axis IMU, Bluetooth, and as well as IR. And so what we're able to do actually is we're able to take two objects that are relatively close to each other, and we have a system of receivers, which I showed earlier in the, let's see. You see these little white orbs? So for those devices, there will be certain devices in your home that you don't need point and control. They affect the entire house. So for example, potentially your sound system, but something like your thermostat.
Sure.
That's something you can have already on your device, right? Whereas for those things, when you actually need to be able to differentiate between the things that you're dealing with, you can hook up one of these sensors and you can place them anywhere. I mean, they're as small as they are to scale against that phone roughly. You place them next to the thing you want to control, and boom, there you are. You've now created a link, a visual, clickable link for yourself to be able to hit.
Okay.
Does that work? Yes.
You mentioned before you worked with people in music. Have you looked at using one of these devices with a conductor, because they're gesticulating wildly, moving, conducting the instruments, and you could sort of imagine playing this virtual orchestra or other things. Are you exploring it from a creative standpoint to see how the dynamics can change?
So it's funny. In an older version of our website, we actually had a fellow in our. So we did a video for Indiegogo campaign. We dressed that guy up in a tuxedo, and we had him kind of like conducting electronics. I haven't personally explored how to conduct a symphony with Remo. However, I have imaginatively thought it would be really freaking cool. So it is something that we've thought about. I do have some friends who are kind of DJs, and obviously since I have some music background, but that's not something that I've focused on developing applications for, and in the company we haven't. I think that's an opportunity for developers. Yes.
So along that line, I think it kind of daisy chains what they mentioned about differentiation. With the linguistics, customizable gestures, so if I want to do the light or the whatever, is that something that there's capability for it, or is it?
Yes, so there is absolutely capability to assign certain appliances to certain gestures. But the thing that allows the system to be ubiquitous no matter where you go, and I mean from your house to my house to the school, is the ability to point, select, and then gesture in a very unified way. So you might have your own gesture for your own appliance or for your own setup. So for example, in the case of romance mode, Confident Monologue guy there does it by selecting each one of the things. But he could just as easily by context select one and have several things go, or do a particular combination of gestures. It's also be possible.
That's kind of perfectly segues into the second part. So if I have multiple, say I'm in a manufacturing, and I have multiple cranes with multiple people, and up or down or whatever, I mean, that was my question is, how do you control that interference? Is it maybe a kind of combination of the orbs and the sensors, or?
Yeah, it can be a combination of the orbs and the sensors, but what I understood you to be talking about was customizable gestures.
Exactly.
And so in the case of customizable gestures, as opposed to selecting one individually, you might have a combination like, where you do that rapidly enough, and then it selects the group of the things that you have already pre-programmed to select, if that makes sense. I haven't gotten any from back here, but I'll get to you. You've had your hand up for a minute.
What's your price point?
The price point is, I think we're putting them out for about $250 right now on the website. We've really focused on trying to keep things as affordable as possible, but I also want to make clear, and I mentioned it in the presentation, that we're really focused on this technology being ubiquitous. And so we're not really, I wouldn't call us a hardware company, right? We make gesture control for the Internet of Things. So this is software that you can see on devices coming along the line. People who get experience in developing with Remo today will be able to, will be on the front lines of dealing with it when it's incorporated in other spots. Did you have a follow-up?
I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, what do I need on the infrastructure side of things, because that obviously measures your nerve contractions. Like the one I've got to click this and then open my fingers and it advances my PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, very different actually. So what we're doing and what you're talking about are actually quite different. So as I said, Remo uses an IMU, a 9-axis IMU, as well as some wireless communications tech. That means that we're responding to these bigger motions, right? We're not responding to the electrical signals that go across the muscles. There's a number of reasons for that in terms of, there's a number of reasons that we're not doing that. Part of it has to do with the history of the development of the technology in the first place. And these bigger muscles degenerate slower than if I've got to do all of this stuff. Anybody who has arthritis or thinks they might get it knows what I'm talking about. That's not a space that we wanted to invest in. So it's quite different in that regard. In terms of infrastructure, what you saw on the slides was all you really need for the infrastructure. If you're dealing with a connected device and it can go over IP to the internet, or it's Bluetooth enabled, it's already got what you need. We can drag and drop the appliance right in. Like I said, we work with the major players in the connected device space, so it's most of the pieces are already there. Yes, Ann?
Mohammed, do you have any vision of incorporating our phones, our email, regular internet services into Remo or into your gesture control in a new product someday, or are you specifically staying in this space?
Playdabase as a company reserves the right to create solutions that people love no matter what. But Remo Technology specifically, I see directly the movement in smartwatches in the consumer electronics space, seeing massive adoption potentially very soon. And it's a funny thing. So at the Wearable Technologies Conference in London last year. It's actually happening right now. I was speaking on a panel and was asked about making these products and making sure that they last. Like, how do you make sure your company survives, basically? And I said that you should have something unique that doesn't just replicate the functionality of the smartphone, or else you'll die. Like, don't do what everybody else is doing. And Sonny Vu, CEO of Misfit, said it very flat out. He just said, look, if you're in the fitness spot, if you're doing a fitness tracker, there will be like 2 or 3 companies out of the total number of companies here that might survive going forward. At the time, there were 104 companies there, about more than 50 were fitness trackers. Isn't that brutal? So long term, I see our technology, not just long term, short term. I see our technology integrating into other watches. But as it stands today, the hardware is approximately is this size. Yes.
I'm curious about the intelligence of your software detection system. As a human, can use sign language that contains concepts of martial arts, and in the corporate world, there's all kinds of things, even spontaneous stuff you need to do a move. How do you match what your device will recognize as an allowable gesture to make something happen with all the possible limitations to what humans do?
So there are almost innumerable movements that one could do with their arms or with gesture. The thing about it is that there's only so many that we actually recognize in the gesture set. So the signature from an inertial measurement unit is clearly distinct in certain cases and less distinct in others.
Just doing that measure, would you be able to increase or decrease, for example, temperature of the machine?
Yes, that's exactly what the system's designed to do.
But you wouldn't go this way to turn it off.
No. So the gesture, the prototypical gesture set that we developed involves increasing intensity, decreasing intensity, and changing state.
So there is word sign language involved.
Yeah, but it's a cross-linguistic symbolic interface language. I wouldn't call it a language in truth, because I'm not in language. I myself am not a layman, so I don't want to use that term. But as a communication system, it's fairly straightforward across the different spectrum. So increase intensity, decrease intensity, select, change state, and then you can swipe between things that you're trying to control. As demonstrated in the video. And we actually released a video 5 or 6 days ago that actually goes through the gesture set and explains, here are the gestures and here's how they might work. Yes, Paige?
Hi, Mohammed. Thanks for sharing about Remo. So I see a really great potential in the education and cultural sector for gesture recognition. Have you experimented at all with any opportunities in working with those fields?
With education?
Education and cultural sector.
I think there's a tremendous opportunity for folks who are interested deeply in the arts and the integration of Internet of Things into arts to explore remote tech, and I'd seriously encourage it. To jump on top of, to collect that with the conversation about conducting a symphony. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there in the arts. However, we focused on healthcare and smart home today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes?
So when you get a room full of IoT devices, you've got your toaster, your blender, your lights and everything, how good is your system at not turning things on and off accidentally?
It's quite good. So our system will be out and available for folks to test. As I said, we've already started selling our alpha units to companies. Betas will be coming soon. But even in case you make a mistake in terms of your selection of a device, like you've got 2 that are relatively close, those little sensors, for example, can blink up and tell you selected both of us by mistake somehow. You swipe left or you swipe right to get the one that you want.
I mean, I talk with my hands.
Yeah, no, that's
So I'm sitting here and I'm going like this, and the toaster turns on the blender.
that's definitely something that, I mean, that's early, like in 2012, we were like, all right, how do we deal with that scenario? So you actually get a little bit of haptic feedback when you successfully do a gesture, and the device actually stays asleep until you successfully execute a selection gesture. So you could be waving your hand and doing whatever, but until you actually do the point, it's not awake. And so that really protects you in one sense. The other is that because we've been able to create directionality for the device, unless you actually point at the device, you're not going to activate it. So there's a safeguard in there 2 times. 1, unless you do the proper gesture, it's not going to wake up. And 2, unless you actually wave your hands in the direction of that device, nothing's going to happen. And you'll get the haptic feedback to tell you you're doing it anyway. So if you do accidentally turn on your blender and you can't hear it, you'll still feel it. Yes?
So you said you have an SDK, and I'm curious because I saw you have patents as well. Where you figured out the boundary between the things that you want to keep as intellectual property that is part of your business and where you provide the points of open development?
So I'll say that our SDK is in continued development from our technical team, and I'll say that that's simply that's not my deepest area of expertise in the development of an SDK. What I can say is that access to the gesture set and access to some of that data to be able to use those gestures for the controls and the interactions is something that you'll absolutely have some access to, and so. I don't see our IP being threatened by opening up people's opportunity to use our technology. Is basically that. Does that help?
Yeah.
So we can talk more after. Yes.
Can you talk through some of the industrial applications that you see and what could provide to really penetrate into the industrial world with technology?
Well, I actually got a question about the industrial applications a little bit earlier. Maybe I didn't address it deeply enough.
You talked about the cranes.
Yeah, we talked about cranes. We talked about gathering information from different devices. We talked about a couple things.
Is there a space that you think would be most likely would not take penetration of technology?
I think that the people who let's see. Personally, I like warehousing and interacting with warehouses. Like that's just an area I think would be very interesting to use it in. I've seen some places where they're shipping product, packaging product, and moving it around in chutes and things like that. I think it could be tremendously useful as opposed to having a handheld thing that I have to go through and search through. I like what I'm seeing in the movement in that space recently with heads-up displays. I think gesture would be a fantastic augmentation of that because I think it would free up the individual and give some creative control that extends beyond just having pure robotics involved. But at the same time, I don't have a strong background, for example, in agriculture. So the immediate applications of that, I'm very excited to see what people who are developers will see and come up with. And we've been very focused on how we can support people who see these applications in the best way that we can. Yes, great shirt.
2 questions. I assume that this is speed independent, so it doesn't matter if I do the gesture fast or slow.
So the speed is not perfectly independent by nature. If I start here and that can cause some difficulty. Okay. But that's the beauty of what we're talking about. I mean, what we're going to be releasing consumer side is not going to assume a very debilitated geriatric case. But as we said, we're looking to move towards healthcare going forward as well. So we can just as you can adjust the speed of your mouse, you have the potential to adjust things for remote.
And I assume that everything is relative to the room that you're in. Like there's some base sensors, so like everything's relative to where I'm facing in a particular room, but I'm not going to line of sight effectively in another room. Just as when I'm in another room, I might be pulling the same general direction, but be relative to something some sensor in that room.
That's correct. So it's entirely based on your orientation, where you are at the time. We do have the ability, and we have done filings and things of that nature to control things in other rooms. As I mentioned, you might have control of your thermostat that affects the whole house. You don't have to be in front of your thermostat. But definitely, we found a great power in effectively surfing the Internet of Things.
Thank you for making that SDK available, because I could see, his original question with people who, like Stephen Hawking, he couldn't really do a gesture, but he could move some other way, could probably benefit from a lot of the work that you've done.
Potentially. There's a company I know of in, I think they're in Holland, that does some twitch stuff, where they're able to measure twitches around the eyes to control certain things. Obviously not an application that's going to be immediately popular for the mainstream, and it's very difficult as a startup to try to get your velocity in that kind of scenario where it's very limited. But I'm very hopeful. Making the world more accessible is, we need that. Yes.
Does your business model or approach to intellectual property assume that you're the only hardware manufacturer of the wearable part, and can you reach the kind of ubiquity that you hope to with that limitation?
Oh no, we don't assume that we're the only hardware maker of smartwatches. I think we would lose that pretty quickly.
But you assume that, so you expect you have your technology available for others, smartwatches that would be developed into other people's smartwatches then?
Absolutely. The ubiquitous computing must be ubiquitous. And that applies to the technology as well as to the business models. It's not likely that anybody starting a company today is going to compete with Apple in making great hardware, right? It takes phenomenal resources to accomplish that. I'll just say it again, ubiquitous computing must be ubiquitous. That means that the devices that are around us and our ways to interact with them must be interactable, and how we get to that point requires some creativity on our parts. So absolutely, we're developing software. We've been developing the hardware together with the software because, quite frankly, the smartwatch market and all of that just wasn't there for the longest. So, but there's been some great smartwatches out there. I know some of the folks who've made them. They've done really great things. Great strides have been made. And thank you to all of the people who are involved in developing IoT. Thank you so much. I'm available for questions after. Greatly appreciate it. And thanks again, Pat.